make start on this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, this Tuesday evening. And we're very happy to be joined by both Nicky, Georgia, and Annelise. Apologies, it's very hot. And we're also very thankful for Veranda Books for offering us their very nice venue.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. And so before we get started, I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things in terms of the event. We have two partners we'd like to thank. One is the Chinese Literature Readers Club, who is very kindly we're very grateful for their support in offering us their event, their support for us this evening, as well as Arts Council England, who we are funded through by their MPO program. You'll see a couple of QR codes dotted around the room. If you could, after this event, if you could scan that, and there'll be a short questionnaire on there on Arts Council England's Illuminate platform. It basically helps Arts Council make their case for more arts in this country in front of central government. So if you want to see more events like this, please, we do urge you to answer that questionnaire. And with that, I think I'll hand off to Georgia.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Yes. Well, greetings, everyone. I mean, how lovely to be here. Yes, and I'm Georgia from Bookblast. So tonight we're celebrating Ning. No, you'll have to correct me. Ning. Yeah, excuse me, my falling. And also now Ling Shuhua. Shuhua?
Yes, Shuhua.
Yes, exactly. So, for those of you who don't know, Ning is a leading Chinese novelist and essayist, currently serves as the chairwoman of the China Federation of Literary and Art Circles. She was the first woman to be elected president of the Chinese Writers Association, a position she held from 2006 to 24, during which time she promoted greater diversity and inclusivity within its ranks. She has had many literary awards, and she has been translated into many languages, including English. So tonight it is My Sister's Red Shirt that we are particularly focusing on. Now, Ling Shuhua was a Chinese modernist writer and painter whose short stories were popular during the 20s and 30s. Very well educated, she married Chen Yuan, the academic and critic, and they had a daughter. During World War II, she moved to the UK and then to Paris, where she represented the Republic of China at UNESCO. In 1947, Ling also left China and the couple settled in Europe. There are 3 short stories by Ling Shuhua. They are free to view in various online lit mags, and a collection of her stories is in preparation by Nicky. So now, tonight, two, leading, amazing, wonderful translators. Very honoured to be interviewing them both. Annelise Finegan is Academic Director of Translation at the NYU School of Professional Studies, where she brings literary techniques to a technical graduate degree, and a best of both worlds approach, encouraging sustainable careers for students who focus in all domains of translation. She's translated works by authors such as Lu Min, I've got pronunciation, Su Yanling and Kan Kun, including the novels The Last Lover and Love in the New Millennium, for which her translation was longlisted for the 2019 Man Booker Prize. Now, passionate about spreading Chinese literature to English readers, Nicky Harman has translated the works of many renowned Chinese authors in English. She's won several awards, including the 2020 Special Book Award of China. When not translating, she promotes contemporary Chinese fiction to the general English language reader through the website paperrepublic.org. Do visit it, paperrepublic.org. She also blogs, gives talks, mentors new translators, teaches summer school, and judges translation competitions, and she lives in the UK. So, first of all, I'll hand over to Annelise, who's going to talk a little bit about translating My Sister's Red Shirt and give us a reading and everything else.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful to be in a room full of people who are invested in Chinese literature and translation literature and translation more generally, or the convergence of the two. Thank you to Veranda Books. Thank you to Bookblast, to Georgia, to Nicky, and of course, Annelise Books. So at its core, this is a book about the affection between two sisters who are 8 years apart in age. Their love for each other is a bit possessive, in part because they were separated from their parents during early childhood. Also, because they came of age in different historical periods, there's a generation gap between the two of them. The older sister came of age during China's Cultural Revolution. The younger sister is coming of age, and we observe this process during the period of opening and reform immediately afterward. The younger sister is individualistic and outspoken and anti-conformist and questions authority, and receives some critique and pushback for this. And the older sister tries to protect her. So the book is also very much about how we try to support and protect those in our lives who are outspoken in different ways about authority. As it turns out, though, the two sisters are also keeping secrets from each other. No spoilers, definitely read the book. It all leads to a major conflagration, a literal conflagration. But it's a very lovely and exciting story, centering on the sisters' relationship, their place within school and society, and the relationship to their parents as well. Now, why now? 40 years after this book, this story novella was initially published, should you read it today? Well, for people from China of a certain generation, this work has intense cultural nostalgic currency. When I speak with people about this book who are from that generation, who came of age at that time, the passion just overflows. They recall scenes and memories from the book. They want to know how it was possible to translate certain pieces of it. And so there's that. And frankly, to understand a generation that's in power today, this is the same age of this culture. I also think in many ways, the lessons of the book speak to where an English language readership is coming to be today. As you can probably hear from my voice, I'm from the United States. It's a time where maybe in past decades, we could have sort of looked down at our nose around things around questions around freedom of speech and things like that. It's less easy to do that now. So that's another reason to be reading this book. And then in the interest of time, I'm going to do just a very brief reading. And this is from the section of the book that introduces the red shirt, which symbolizes the younger sister's independence, her freestanding mindset, her freedom of spirit is symbolized throughout the book by this bright red shirt. Afterwards, the Cultural Revolution started. Afterwards, the Cultural Revolution ended. When I was sent down to the countryside, all I heard was that Wei Wan had been recommended to go to college. Now she had been recalled to Pingyi to be a middle school teacher and happened to be the head of my sister Anran's class. We should have been in contact, given that we lived in the same city, had been classmates in primary school, and also had my sister Anran as a connection. I don't know why we had never been in touch. Running into Wei Wan now, it seemed like we'd be obligated to stand together talking for a while. I never imagined I'd run into you here. Are you waiting for someone? We stood facing each other. Oh, she said, apparently enthusiastically. I heard when you were selected to come back to Pingyi. It's incredible we haven't seen each other for so long. Are you waiting for someone too? No, I was going for a walk by myself, I said. We went on to chat about our classmates from when we were little before the topic turned to Anran. We would have been just left standing there if we didn't have my sister to talk about. How does Anran present herself in class? I asked. How can I put it? Actually, I was planning to visit your home to talk with you about it. Wei Wan's tone was earnest, as if imitating the expression of some former teacher of ours. She's intelligent, and she's studious. It's just. Of course, I've been waiting for that "it's just." To put it in formal terms, it's just that her interpersonal relationships aren't good. She likes making fun of people, I probed. How can I put it? This seemed to be Wei Wan's new favorite platitude. Anjing, you're Anran's sister and my old classmate. You should help her get on the right path. You're saying that, Anran? My heart beat faster. When I was little, I'd taken any teacher's words to be worth their weight in gold, and Wei Wan was making me return to that time. Maybe I'm putting it too seriously, she said. But in fire prevention, there's a saying that there's no outbreak with prevention. What is it really? I couldn't control myself. There's a girl in her class named Ni Xiaoling who was furious at Anne recently. After investigating the matter, I concluded that the blame falls on her. She shouldn't hurt her classmates by singing songs at them. Besides, that song, I really can't repeat it. In short, she shouldn't let these things happen. So that was it. I gave a long sigh. Is there anything else? I asked. How can I put it? Besides making fun of her classmates, Anran recently has also, how can I put it? For example, I was expecting this, for example, and sure enough, for example, she's always spending time with a boy named Liu Donghu. Also, she used to be quite plain, but now she dresses up. Last week, I think she wore a red shirt. Yes, buttonless, with a zip down the back. That's a new purchase. I almost said that I'd bought it for Anran. Yes, that's the problem. Wei Wan was just about to add something when the person she was waiting for arrived. I walked back along the boulevard. The streetlights standing among the poplars lit up the stars on the trunks that resembled eyes. I was in the public eye while continuing to follow my own road.
Thank you. Now, Nicky is going to talk a bit about Ling Shuhua and her relevance today, and read, and there we are.
So, in lieu of a book, I've done this nice little press release for you. Imagine that next year this will be a book. So the QR code is actually to a presentation I did in Leeds on International Women's Day this year about Ling Shuhua self-writing, and I did it with Yengo. So who was Ling Shuhua? She had an extraordinary life. She lived from 1900 to 1990. She was born in China, in Beijing, a very traditional family, and her father had 5 wives, concubines, and she was a fairly junior. She, I think, was number 10 of a very large family. But her father also believed in modern education, and she and her younger sister, who later emigrated to America, had a very modern education at Peking University and also in Japan. So this was quite interesting. This obviously was long before the war between China and Japan. And Japan, there were a lot of Chinese writers and intelligentsia who spent time in Japan, and Japanese education was greatly valued. And to the end of her life, she was quite Japan was important to her. Anyway, the other thing that was very important to her was the idea that she was going to become a writer. She took classes in painting. She became a very accomplished painter, but primarily in her early 20s. She became a writer, and she attained quite an important position in Beijing amongst literary circles, and very many luminaries, really important artists and painters, admired her writing. So at a young age, she became a kind of literary star in Beijing. Her first story was published at age 24. She only ever wrote short stories. And then throughout the 1920s, she carried on having her short stories published. They lived in Beijing the intelligentsia lived a fairly cosmopolitan life. They had visitors from the West. They read Western writers, either in the original or in translation, Russian, British, French, American, and so on. And they had some, Ling Shuhua herself in her family home welcomed some very interesting visitors, for example, Bertram Russell and his then lady friend, later his wife, Dora Black, who was scandalously pregnant, but they were not at that point married. And Dora Black gave lectures in, was it Chihua or Peking University? To Ling Shuhua and her sister and other students about love, freedom, and free love, sexuality for modern women and women's rights in the USSR. And Ling and others hosted the Bengali scholar Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, let me try that again. Rabindranath Tagore. And so she was very well known for her salons. During those years, she produced 3 volumes of stories, and they were almost all about the interior world of women, women's oppression, women's attempts to fight against the constraints in which they found themselves. But what was rather extraordinary about her stories is that they scarcely referenced what was going on in the outside world. It wasn't even the outside world, it was the hutong outside her front door, and outside the hutong in the main drag, civil society was breaking down. There was very serious poverty and violence, and life was pretty grim for those who didn't live within the protected walls of the hutong alleys. And yet you would never know that from her stories. So I kind of basically divided her stories up into 3 main general themes. So there's the child's eye view of the grown-up world, which I think she does exceptionally well, and I love those stories. They're not really stories for children, they're stories with a child protagonist. Young women striving for independence, coming to terms with their sexuality, and stories of educated women's crushed ambitions and defeat or small victories. And there's even one story which features a man, but most of them were about women, and some of them were also. In fact, the bit I'm going to read you is a monologue by an illiterate woman, so it kind of bucks the trend of these general themes that she wrote about. So then, halfway through the 20s, she gets married. And because of the war, they have to move to Wuhan. Her husband, Chen Xiying, becomes a dean at Wuhan University, which at the time is a kind of provincial backwater. And she loses her position, her contacts, and I think must have found life very hard as a faculty wife. Then a scandalous event happens. Virginia Woolf's nephew, Julian Bell, arrives in Wuhan as a teacher, and he and Ling Shuhua have an affair in about 1930. So this is 10 years after they've moved there. They're discovered, surprise, surprise, and Julian Bell leaves China in disgrace in 1936, I think the end of 36. Comes back to England and then signs up to go and work as an ambulance driver in the Spanish Civil War, and within a couple of months is killed at the Battle of Brunete. So Chen Xiying and Ling Shuhua stay together, which in itself is fairly remarkable, according to her biographers and also to her daughter. He greatly admired his wife and respected her. And anyway, they carry on living together. And then the war really turns their lives upside down, along with the other universities and the university teachers. They move west to Sichuan. After the war against Japan ends, so 1945, actually just a bit before that, Chen Xiying moves to the west, and in 1947, Ling Shuhua and her daughter follow. And then something rather strange and rather sad happens, which is that Shuhua seems to kind of lose her bearings. And all the way through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, she doesn't die till 1990. She's not really writing. She, along with many other Chinese, and I've only just discovered the extent of this, they go through constant attempts to go back to China, think they'll go back, then they don't go back, they don't want to go to Taiwan, so they move around. Chen Xiying dies in about, I think it's the early 70s. And Ling Shuhua really makes her living by painting and doing kind of odd things, bit of teaching. But her writing has stopped in 1935, 1936, which to me is tragic because all that promise, all that talent, all these amazing short stories, they never go any further. She does write her autobiography in English, but then she never writes anything more. So at that point, I'm going to read. Oh, and just to say that although she is then largely forgotten, all during the 50s and 60s and 70s, in the 1980s, Professor C.T. Xia in America rediscovers her. And since then, individual stories have been translated, including by me. And as I said, I'm working on getting a collection published. If anyone can get hold of the Italian, there is already a collection in Italian, but it's kind of out of print. It was printed, I think, in the 1985. Right. So this is the monologue by an illiterate woman. It's called Writing a Letter. You can actually read it if you follow the QR code. You'll find the link in there. It was published by the Shanghai Literary Review. So a monologue by an illiterate woman who asks an educated neighbour woman to write a letter for her to her husband. And it's full of nuances and it's quite humorous. And you can tell that the sadly ignorant illiterate woman is basically no pushover. And right at the end, you discover that she's more than able to keep her end up. One Sunday morning, Miss Wu has a visit from her next-door neighbour. Mrs. Zhang comes into Miss Wu's study, wreathed in smiles, and carrying her young son in her arms. "Good morning, Miss Wu. You are still reading and writing on a Sunday. Are you trying for the imperial examinations or something? I don't know how long I've been waiting to see you. This morning I woke up and heard the church bells and said to myself, don't preserve us, it's Sunday already. I've been wanting to ask you to write a letter for me for the last 10 days, but you're always at college. Or if you're here, you're reading or writing articles, and I don't like to disturb you. So I thought I'd take my time answering him. It's not that important, but now he's written 2 more letters." "Who? This one's Daddy, that's who. Miss Wu, you have no idea how hard it is not being able to read and write. You're such a lucky lady. Whatever you want to say, you just write it down. It was all my mother's fault, you know. My father really wanted me to get a proper education. But my mother was afraid it would turn me into an independent woman, and a bad man would lead me astray. So she refused to let me go to school. Just the day before yesterday, I was complaining to her. It's all your fault for not letting me go to school, and now look at me. I'm completely word blind." Look at you, Miss Wu, I said. Look at Miss Wu, I said, merrily scribbling her ideas down, and she's still the perfect lady, not a bit independent. My mother's sorry now, so she makes sure her granddaughters go to school every day. Have I got another minute? Or okay. What do I want you to write? So many things. I often think how lucky you are to remember all those thousands of characters and find exactly the ones you want. For someone who can't read like me, even when I've got things I really want to say, it's hard to find the words. I love being with bright young ladies like you, but I'm always struck dumb. I don't know why. Once I was having words with this one's dad, and I said to him, "Don't go thinking I have to put up with your family forever. I could go out tomorrow and get myself a job. I don't care how humble it is. I could move in with Miss Wu and do stitching and mending. It would be 100 times better than having to live in this dog kennel of yours. They don't shout at their servants, not like you people who don't know how to behave and fly off the handle at the slightest thing. I'm not your servant. You haven't met my husband, have you? He's as bad-tempered as a bull. If he didn't rub people up the wrong way all the time, he would have been a battalion commander by now," and so on, and so on. And she just, and until the end of the story, you never hear from Miss Wu. So it's a great story.
Love it, Lucy, you know. So, well, thank you. So that actually leads in rather well to my first question. Both of you, I'll ask you, Nicky, first, and Annelise. What would you most like readers to know or take away about both Ning and Ling Shuhua, who are both obviously very original women writers from very different periods of Chinese literature, and also how did they and do they conform or rather not conform to social and literary, expectations?
I think Ling Shuhua was unusual even in her day. I mean, there were other women writers of her era, but she was unusually forensic in her examination of the female psyche. And she was also very, I mean, I have no idea what she was like as a person. There are many different stories about what she was like. But as a writer, she was very empathetic. And she came from this very rich family, but she writes, as you can tell, equally well. She gets inside the heads of illiterate, ignorant women, poor women who are very seriously oppressed, just as much as of the educated women. I mean, there's a wonderful story called On the Eve of the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is one of her most famous, where the anti-heroine of the story is this woman who is so superstitious that she insists her husband stays with her for the ceremonial evening meal instead of going to visit his dying stepsister. And it just leads to disaster in the family because the stepsister dies before he can eventually get there. And you see it all through the eyes of this woman who simply doesn't understand how she's destroyed the family and how her own superstitions have put paid to any good relationship between herself and her husband. So I think I'd like people to know that although it's 100 years ago, and although society was clearly completely different, you don't need to understand that much about China to get what's in the stories.
She's obviously a very keen human, she observed. Obviously a keen observer and keen listener. And that's the thing about actually, that's literature like this, it's universal and ageless and timeless, because she's really observing human beings and also the women who are, these women who are crushed. Now, Annelise, over to you on that sort of subject.
Thank you. With Ning, I think I would love for people to know what a beautiful transmuter or what beautiful transmutations she does of the reality around her into these very precisely observed portraits and observations about interpersonal relationships. This particular work, My Sister's Red Shirt, is generally considered to be semi-autobiographical, so if you want to know more about her, read the book. But they're also, I talked about the relationship with the sister, but there are these extremely well-absorbed portraits of the parents in the book, of the father who's a painter, and he paints non-figuratively, but can't bring himself to do political portraiture. And then there's also an almost savage portrayal of the mother, very, very critical portrayal of the mother, but also an understanding of where the mother has come from to have her be in this very disappointing stage of life and career that she finds herself in. And then finally, thinking too, since it is Women in Translation Month, about Tianing's path into English, and so many Chinese women writers' path into English, that it is extraordinary to see this book out now. There's a previous one, The Bathing Woman, and then many years ago when I was young, I was asked to do a short excerpt from a novel of Tianing's, which will now be coming out as Passages of Rose.
Yes.
From Sino's books, which is fantastic. And was told at the time, well, no one else really wants to do this. And I'm always most fascinated when I hear that from potential editors or writers, and they say, no one wants to do this. And it's like, oh, okay, that's for me then. And so that was very rewarding at the time. It's wonderful that it will come out now. And that early translation was the connection that brought me to this book. So it's wonderful to see more Chinese women writers represented in English.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the relationship between the sisters. Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, really, the way she portrayed the whole family, you get really absorbed. And it's both funny and wonderful and also very frustrating, which is human relationships. Yes, so both Ning and Ling Shuhua, okay, they were leading women writers of their time, and you've explained a little bit about what they focused on in their work. But what's shifted over time, and which of their themes have a timeless universal quality, or have other things been picked up on subsequently, more in tune with now? You see how it's evolved. So I'll ask Annelise first.
I think the My Sister's Red Shirt is, I find it extraordinary that she was 24 when she wrote this. And what she has gone on to write since then is also marvelous. It also, her other writing delves more into more generational trauma, explicit representation of violence against women, and things like that. Always foregrounding women's issues. That's been perennial in her career. But I think that might be one shift that I observe in writing.
I think I kind of answered this
Answered
question,
it really.
but I suppose I'd say what's quite interesting is that her stories which focus on children and the childlike world, view of an adult world, actually came later in her writing. So she was writing those at the end of the 1920s, not at the beginning. She started off writing about young women, which she was obviously herself at the time. And then you've got these extraordinary child protagonists. And then in 1935-36, that's it. The curtain comes down. So who knows what she might have written. But on the other hand, she does have 40 stories, of which I would happily translate 38, possibly even 39, So she has quite an oeuvre.
Yeah.
And it does develop over time.
And you mentioned biography. I mean, does the biographers not touch on what happened, or lulls?
Biography is a bit of a strange beast. It was written in English. It was written at the encouragement of Vanessa Bell and Virginia Woolf.
Oh, okay.
It actually only happened because she was drafting it in Le Chan, where they were in Sichuan during the war, and she was sending these draft chapters over to Virginia Woolf to look at.
Hogarth Press, I guess. There we are.
Yeah, and Virginia Woolf was still alive at that point.
Yeah.
But what is extraordinary is that these bundles of paper arrived in the UK and stayed there and stayed
Wow.
in Hogarth Press. The whole of the Ling Shuhua's copy of the draft got lost during the, and it was only because Leonard Woolf had kept what had been sent to England that she was able then to complete it when she arrived, and it was published in 1953.
Goodness.
But it was a rather odd sort of beast, as I said, because it was explaining to British people who knew nothing about China. And there was so much to explain because they really didn't know the background. And also some of the stories, it's really not clear whether they are actually semi-fiction or whether when she fictionalized them, they were autobiographical. So it was written in a rather episodic way and finished when she was about 17, so it wasn't a proper autobiography. And she was working on another version, another iteration, carrying the story onwards, and she never did it. And then Leonard Woolf died, so that never really developed.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Annelise, would either of these writers regard themselves as feminist or even championing women's rights in any way? Or, and if not, I mean, I don't know, does it matter? Does it matter or not? Or
It's a great question. It's hard to overstate the cultural position that TNU has for 18 some years as the head of the China Writers Association, a position from which she could champion women's writing and writing from different ethnic and minority groups. When I think about this work in particular as the one I've spent the most time with, I appreciate its historical perspective on feminism in the protagonist's description of how her experience, and this is the older sister's experience, coming through the Cultural Revolution, where there was a rather normative view of a standard ungenderedness in a way, a very robust and healthy sort of gender neutral sort of norm, and how what she sees in the younger sister is someone who was initially sort of naturally a tomboy, but is growing into femininity. So it's a very specific and very historically specific perspective on feminism there, but certainly her way of working through having more options available at that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's a difficult question in connection with women writers in early 20th century China.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't think of feminism then without thinking of the May the 4th movement, which was I even actually printed something off it. The May the 4th movement was a Chinese anti-imperialist political movement, started in 1919. I'm not going to go into many more details about it, but it grew into a very important cultural movement as well as this political movement. And of course, as a writer, Ling Shuhua was part of that. And of course, women's rights were an integral part of the May the 4th movement. But were women's rights the same as feminism? And how do you define feminism? And how did they define feminism? It's really not an easy question to answer. I think the important thing is that as if you're interested in feminism, if you regard yourself as feminist now, you will find that there is so much in her stories which respond to that, which give you a feeling of what it was like to be a woman then. So, did she regard herself as feminist? I mean, did the word even exist then?
Well, women's, well, I think the suffragettes. I suppose it started with the suffragettes, didn't it? And then not China.
Yes.
The word women's. I'm just wondering with the Bloomsbury lot because they were quite engaged with all that kind of stuff. So just
I don't recall any. I mean, in Virginia Woolf and Ling Shuhua's letters, which covered a period of 2 years at the end of the 30s. I haven't read them all, but I don't remember the word feminism coming up. But how women were living through the war and in their own personal lives was something they talked about. So, you know, if you take feminism as a very broad concept,
Yeah.
yes, I'm sure she would regard herself
Mm.
as feminist, but I don't know if she had the word in her vocabulary.
No, absolutely right. Actually, feminism then wasn't just women's rights. It was women's rights because it wasn't Nancy Astor who championed. Here, I'm thinking here in England, and I'm just thinking of the relationship with.
You see,
If
in
they were
China,
exchanging not only in China with
the most,
any kind
the
of
most important thing
you
in
know-
China was political rights for all human beings,
Right.
and women's
Right.
rights were part of that.
part of that. Yeah, okay.
Um,
Was that whole thing about being
and
remote?
for China to recreate itself, rebuild
Mhm.
society,
Mhm.
that society had broken down.
So it's part of
So it's all part of the bigger political
yeah.
picture.
Okay. Yes, so I mean, their writing indeed, yes, it explores big universal themes, but in very, very different contexts, actually. So Ning addresses, let's say, art for art's sake, whereas Ling Shuhua is art in service of politics. Now, how do ideas such as these manifest in their work, and how actually do they resonate for you as translators when you're translating, and even how you're working today as women translators, I guess?
That's a really interesting question. There's a section in the novella where the two daughters are trying to interpret one of their father's paintings. It's a landscape, it's figurative.
Oh, yes.
And the younger daughter comes up with an interpretation that sends her father back to the easel, re-inspired to address the painting again through his daughter's eyes. And he always tells his daughters to look at the world through their own eyes. And there's a extended quote from I think Sixpence in a Dream of Somerset Maugham included about just art for art's sake, set aside apart from anything else. But in 1984 in China, that is a political statement to put that in a book right there. So I think that aspect of what Ning is doing there is really interesting that you that trying to carve out a space for art's sake is itself a statement.
Okay. Okay. Mhm.
And Ling Shuhua, no, I would say that one of the reasons why she fell out of the mainstream, as it were, was because she didn't believe in art in the service of politics.
Right.
That she also believed in art for art's sake. And the other more politicized women writers and men writers of the early 20th century, who then carried on living in China and writing during the 1950s and 60s, they were writing art in the service of politics. But no, Ling Shuhua definitely not. She was very focused on the lives of individual women. While I'm quite sure that she was aware of what was going on in the world outside, she didn't write very much about it. How do they resonate? How does that resonate for me as a translator? I think it's so important to have the human view of how people were living in China back then, rather than the overtly politicized view. And I just think her writing is so unusual because it has an immediate impact on you and the reader as a human being, another human being writing about human beings, rather than overtly bringing up class politics or no, not at all.
Yes, so, but Ling Shua's literary career, as you said, was completely interrupted and then by war, and they moved, and then her sister went to the US, and then she and her sister have forgotten. They disappeared into the mist of time until resurrected. You said it began in the 80s. Yeah. Whereas actually Ning has used her platform to push the conversation on women's, I know you say women's rights rather than feminism, actually that's the wrong word of me to use, because that's 70s really, isn't it? Feminist thing. Anyway. In China forward. So, but both of them, how do you see for example, to start with, Ning's influence on contemporary women writers in China and in translation. And I will ask the same thing, because even though sometimes a woman can be forgotten, but it doesn't mean there isn't a little cult following there. So I'll come to that anyway. So first, you.
Yeah, I think in opening up the space for younger women to see themselves as writers, to explore different genres, and to consider this as a path that has meaning, and when you can look to a woman in leadership, or a woman in power, that's always I think profoundly important to those of us coming up.
Yeah. Nicky?
Yes, I said she while she was still alive in the 1980s, American sinologists discovered or rediscovered her. And she came out individual stories in various anthologies. Then there's a sort of period of silence, and now I find that actually there are recent books and biographies. Just one biography in Chinese I got hold of, two biographies in English, Patricia Lawrence and Sasha Welland, both of which well worth reading. Cynically, I feel that students who have done to death Eileen Chang have been told to go away and find someone else, and so they found Ling Shuhua. Ling Shuhua was actually 20 years older than Eileen Chang. But that's just me being cynical. I know there's a lot of study going on about Ling Shuhua at the moment. Students, English language, native English speaker students, Americans, British, and also students in China or Chinese language students who may be actually in the West. And there's a lot of study going on. And is she just a useful person to study? Maybe, but I believe that, her reputation has held up.
Now, I have a couple of more questions, but I thought actually it'd be good for you all listening. You might have some questions to come in and, ask questions. And okay, if we have a little bit of time, but I think we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. Yeah. Then I can ask the other questions to Nicky and Annelise, but it'd be good to hear your reactions, your questions, your thoughts. So I'll open the floor.
Ask the questions. Okay. Thank you very much for presenting such an interesting book. Sorry, I'm just my tongue started. How do you pronounce it? Ning? Yes. She writes at a time, I gather, when sort of a Chinese sort of a situation is restricted in birth control and everything. So when Chinese regime does not allow more than one child, and there are two sisters. My question is, were they separated because of that kind of a political, sort of issues, or they just drifted away, sort of due to education? I didn't actually, sort of sort of obviously in the two sisters, as you sort of said, possibly semi-biographical.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So historically, the one-child policy would have been later, and this is actually the novel's being written in a period of relative openness after the end of the Cultural Revolution. In the story, the reason the two sisters are separated from their parents is because the parents have been persecuted politically, and so they've sent the children away once in one case to live with the grandparents, the grandmother, and in the other case, the younger sister is initially sent to a little they call it a paradise, just in a kidding way, sort of a group living situation for children, and she becomes so obsessed with finding food to eat that the mother realizes that the situation isn't great and sends her to live with the grandmother as well, and the sisters are reunited in the story that way.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question? Yeah. They're years, several, almost 100 years apart between, sort of Ling Shuhua and here. Is the Chinese language that you are, translating from slightly different evolved. Then she actually
yes.
to sort of
Yeah.
a different mode
Yeah.
of Chinese supposed to
Yeah.
be.
No, that's yeah.
I mean, like language, it's 100 years.
Yeah.
English.
It's yeah, that's a really good question. And when I first started translating Ling's stories, I realized that there were lots of ways of combining characters, lots of collocations, lots of phrases, which were not familiar to me and which were not in any dictionary, and I couldn't even find them online. And so, in other words, she was writing in a time when the written, the style of written Chinese was emerging from under the influence of classical and developing as a contemporary writing style. In other words, more similar to the way people actually spoke in real life. But she's kind of almost halfway between the two, and I still find that there are things which I can't quite figure out what that phrase means, and I ask my Chinese friends, and they don't know either because they are 21st century Chinese, not early 20th century. So yes, other than that, I find her very, very readable and therefore very translatable. But yeah, there are times when the influence of the old classical style, it's still there because that was the way she was educated. So that's
Interesting. Good.
I do have a question. Obviously, as translators, you're both in quite different situations regarding the author. In terms of, and so you're long
I can't
departed.
ask her questions.
He was not only very much alive, in a position of quite a lot of political prominence. I was just wondering, how did that dynamic affect your translation?
Well, I wish I could. I really do like my authors to be alive. I really love to ask them questions. But sadly, I just had to get along. I mean, her daughter is alive, but her daughter doesn't write and is now 96. I mean, she writes messages to me, but she is not a writer. So I can't really. I just have to ask my most educated friends. But I mean, I really like to be in a position like Annelise, like, that you can talk to.
I think my author's all dead.
No, just kidding.
No, I love working with living authors. Across the different authors I've translated, I've had like a whole different range of relationships. Some of whom read everything very carefully. Some of whom just like to know that the translation is going on. But for me personally, and this probably differs a great deal from translator to translator, I feel that the conversation is within the text to greater or lesser extent. And you can ask an author, like, what did you mean here? Right. But what they're saying in this case, 40 years later, it's not as definitive as it would have been then. And so I think the really interesting work to me is that conversation with the text as it sits with all of the accompanying research. So I always, if an author has a strong opinion about how they would like something phrased or a specific translation of a word, I'll usually go with it, but it's not 100% authoritative. Makes sense, yeah.
Question over there.
Yes.
Do you think contemporary writers or emerging writers, then you have Einstein, and also how do you describe the feminist writing or writing about Chinese women's rights in contemporary days? And personally, I just also want to say that thank you so much for the event. I came here without knowing that this is a literary event. I only thought I come here to learn about the lives of you both as translators because I was trained in European translating, but now I'm done to research and writing. So it's great to learn that about her personal life and her connection with the journal, which was surprising to me.
That's it. you want to go first?
Oh, I can be quick. I would just say thank you so much for your question. I would just say to start to find out about emerging Chinese writers, read all of Sinoist's list. What they're doing, the most exciting authors today. Yes.
Read Paper Republic. Paper Republic, paper-republic.org, not .com, which will get you to a stationery site. .org has a section, an entire section where we put up free to read, complete short pieces, mostly short stories, but sometimes poems or essays. And there you will find a huge variety. We've got about 8 series of 6, which we put out weekly, having got people to translate them. We like to help emerging translators and give them the opportunity to translate short pieces. And you'll find a huge variety of writers there. I mean, I have my own favorite writers, which haven't necessarily been translated, but I'm working on those. So there's lots of resources, bookshops, Sinoist, Paper Republic, the resources in there.
And also, may I suggest, Book Blast, I host a translation book club on the second Monday of every month, September to June, at Hatchard's in Piccadilly. And we're focusing on Dorothy Tsieh, writer of Owlish, which is a wonderful novel, and that's on the 8th of September. I've left some information. So that is, in a small is beautiful way, we're trying to promote. There is an awful lot of, this is beyond emerging writers and wonderful publishers, like Sinoist Books, but across the board, there's an awful lot going on, which is very exciting. It's very exciting. Veranda is so wedded and passionate about translation, and this is something we're developing, wanting to promote more, hence the book club. So do, at bookblast.org, there's a section about the book club. But that, of course, is right, we read the world, really. Read the world through amazing writers, which, and this is my slightly political angle, is we're rather sick of the news. The media, and is it true or not? I actually trust a novelist at this point much more. A good novel that I trust personally more nowadays than, dare I say it, half the news media. I do not wish to be controversial, so I will trust now. There we are. So, okay. Now, any other questions? Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Let's go. Just
Add to Paper Republic is that the Read Paper Republic series, it's all free of charge. Yes, you can just go on there, and if you don't like it after 3 minutes, you can just drop it and move on to another one. Which is, you can't do that otherwise. It's quite difficult to do that. And the question that I really wanted to ask was, in terms of novels, you've both done novels with sisters. I mean, Annelise is just on the red shirt, and Nicky, my sister's red shirt. And Nicky did Young Girl's White Horse. It was about 2 sisters. And I'm trying to think of other Chinese novelists that have sisters and sisterly relationship. And most of the things that come to my mind is like the older brother, the Gogo and the Mei. The other older brother and the younger sister, or a family of 4. Are there many novels about sisters?
Well, actually, what about the chili bean? That's something I reviewed on Book Blast Diary, was the chili bean
Paste clan.
that's a whole family.
It was about, and it was about a philandering husband.
Yes, but he's men behaving badly and women how they act.
Yeah. So, no, I can't really.
Yeah, I can go on.
Can you think of running through my PhD reading list, not finding any?
The Macaulay sisters, and then other languages you've got lots of stories.
Chekhov,
3 sisters.
3 sisters, of course. Yeah.
Still does it a couple of times.
Yeah, it's true. Good theme. Any other questions?
Time for one.
Okay. Oh, would you one question? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of ask about Ling Shuhua. I was just struck by her kind of stopping writing in 1936. Seems kind of so tragic, but also it kind of seems to mirror how obviously, after Sun Yat-sen, you have this period of kind of things opening up and new things starting. Of course, we know there were a lot of problems under the surface, and then obviously you have the war and the civil war and the stuff that came after it. So it seems almost so natural and so obvious to kind of see the tragedy of her kind of writing having this kind of brief flowering and then being cut off at the stem as just sort of symbolic of kind of
I guess, what was happening to the Chinese literary scene for a while in general. Do you think that's probably a reductive lens to look at her work through?
It's
Or
hard
is it
not
useful?
to be reductive because how else do you make sense of it? And the two biographies that I mentioned don't really address this problem of why she stopped writing.
Yeah.
The Sacha Welland, which is a biography of her grandmother and her great aunt. Her great aunt was Ling Shuhua. And Patricia Lawrence, who wrote about Ling Shuhua and the Bloomsbury Group. They don't really address that. I just got hold of a recent biography in Chinese, which is actually a dual biography of Ling Shuhua and her husband, Chen Xiying, which actually went quite a long way to explaining, in my mind, why her life fell apart. And it wasn't just her life. There were so many of Chinese educated people who couldn't make up their minds whether to go back to China. And if she had gone back, because she was a really anti-political person, she never wanted to write about politics, would she have survived? I mean, there was the anti-rightist movement of the 50s. No doubt she would have got into trouble in that. And there was the Cultural Revolution. Heaven knows what would have happened to her then. So I feel she probably, although she did go back without telling her family on a couple of brief visits, she and her husband could never somehow make up their minds to go back, even though the Chinese government was encouraging educated people to go back. They just couldn't get themselves together. And so she would have had to be writing about her life in the West. And I think many writers would find that very difficult. And think of the writers who have successfully stopped writing about their native land and then started writing about their new country.
Yeah.
Well, Yen Ge has done it quite successfully, but there are others from different nationalities, but they're relatively few because it's such a big ask to stop writing about your own personal life and experiences and start writing literature about another culture. So, I mean, we can only speculate, but I do understand now, as of finishing this memoir in the last 2 weeks, just how unstable their lives were.
Who was that memoir by again?
The one in Chinese.
Oh, that's probably less useful to me then.
The one in English. 1,000 miles of. I can find the title. And it's by Sacha Welland.
Okay.
And Patricia Lawrence is the other one. Patricia Lawrence one has a rather odd title, Lily Briscoe's Chinese Eyes, which is a reference to something in the Bloomsbury writings. Patricia Lawrence, Laur, not Law. But Sacha Welland is very good at explaining Ling Shuhua and her younger sister's respective lives.
Is the daughter, when you speak to her, does she not? You haven't.
She says all sorts of things.
Or said no.
She might or might not be. Well, I don't even. She tells me
Tells
what
you
she
things.
wants to tell.
Yeah.
There's a lot to tell. Mother had a very, very long life. So, she actually pointed me to the biography in Chinese.
Okay.
So
Is that any more questions, or is that Daniel? Will you come?
I think
Okay, that's it. Okay.
So
yeah. So now, we're wrapping up. So buy the books, get them signed, and thank you. And I hope to see you all. So that Monday, the 8th of September, Owlish, Dorothy Say, is being discussed at our book club at Hatchards, Piccadilly. It starts at, when does it start? 6. 6. It's 6 o'clock. That's right. 6 o'clock. And there's information on the flyers, and do visit bookblast.org and have a look. Anyway, thank you thank you so much. Veranda, Books.
There's 2 points of housekeeping real quick. One is, if you enjoyed the event today, we do once again remind you of the questionnaire that Arts Council England has put out. We'll circulate that also via the attendee email afterwards. You can answer that. It'll help us out a great deal. Thank you very much for that. And secondly, if you liked my sister's red shirt today, And if you're willing to part with some of your hard-earned cash to buy one up there, Annelise will be available for signings. But also at the same time, if you could hunt down either myself, my colleague Dawn, and present us, we'll give you an email. If you can email us a receipt, we'll give you a code which gives you a 10% discount on our subscription package, which is basically 6 of the best of Chinese literature and translation coming out over the next bit, delivered to your door, along with a rather nice tote bag. And yeah, just hunt one of us down. We'll give you a card. If you email us your receipt from Veranda, we'll get you that coupon. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.